Let's call to order the Program and Personnel Committee meeting for Monday, March 14th, 2022, here in the Libertyville High School Library. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Thanks everybody for being here. We have just real quickly, our agenda includes communication, which will be invitation for public comment and followed by COVID-19 metrics and testing update, a review of the February committee summary, some personnel items, a few educational tours to talk about, the textbook adoption requests for the coming year, future agenda items, and then we will adjourn. So we will start with the communication. So invitation for public comment. Anyone care to address the board? Hi, Kara. Did we have any email public comments? Nope. Okay, hearing none. We will move on. COVID metrics and testing update brief.
Yep.
Ryan.
So currently, just to give you an update, we're still in low COVID-19 community level for our area. From our dashboard, last week, we had one positive case for students at Libertyville, one positive case for staff at Libertyville, two positive cases for students at Vernon Hills. So we continue to update that. And again, that dashboard is online for everyone to see. We are still testing our unvaccinated staff weekly, and then any staff that voluntarily want to test can also test through Shield testing once a week. Our nurses are still doing point of care testing. So if somebody has symptoms and they come into school, they're still doing point of care testing with our by next test. So that's our update.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Thanks for keeping us up to date. Review of the February committee summary. Anyone have any additions, corrections for that?
I have none.
All right, we'll move on. We have a list of personnel items here. Back to Brian.
There's a packet coming for Kara. So the packet in front of you, just I know for a few of our board members, this is first year going through the process. So put together just kind of a summary of our course selection and staffing process. So at the end of November, our teachers in certain courses will give course recommendations, start with course recommendations for students. The beginning of December, the curriculum guides are updated. Teachers start meeting with students regarding those recommendations. The beginning of January, the students begin course selections. By mid-February, the course selections by students are completed. At the end of February, course sectioning work begins at the building level. And so what course sectioning work looks like at the building level is that as soon as students sign up for courses, they look at the number of students, they look at the optimum class size, and they start looking at the number of sections that we should offer for first semester, second semester, if it's a yearly course, or if it's a semester course, how many sections we should offer first or second semester. With that, they also, at the building level, they start looking at staffing at the building level. So when you have so many sections, again, our teachers teach 5 sections per semester. So they start looking and mapping out some of that staffing. Now that is not complete because then we come together as a district at the beginning of March. So that would be the principals, assistant principals from the building, and a whole district team. We all get together and we spend quite a bit of time. So myself, Rita, Dan, Kelly, Dr. Herman, we all come together and we go through the same thing that they did at the building level, but we look at it as a district. So looking at the number of sections that we offer. And part of the reason we come together is that we're one district. And so although one school may sit down and figure out you know, depending on the optimums or the type of class on when we should offer it. And so we like to be consistent across the board on, you know, what classes we offer. So when we finish that work, then we start looking at staffing, and that again, staffing is the people that will be teaching those courses, and look at, you know, the current staff who will be teaching them. We look at the retirements, we look at any resignations, we look at, you know, all those pieces and start putting, you know, people in those teaching positions, which then brings us to this meeting where I'll present the staffing report and then also employment recommendations. And I'll walk through that with you because again, there'll be some action that will be taken then at the March board meeting. So I'll review this again at the March board meeting, and then you'll take action on our certified staff. And then the end of March, right after spring break, data processing, that will start that scheduling process. They're not starting anything yet because we need formal action taken on our staffing.
Do you and your team also participate in the conversations that take place at the building level before you have your district level conversation?
For sectioning or staffing, no.
Okay.
So like Rita and I will spend time together kind of going, so they go through at the building level, Rita and I will go through the two buildings together. And then and Kelly Hartwig will spend time with the special education side. And then we all come together and work together as a team. So, you know, over the course, basically almost 3 full days, the whole district team is working together and going through staffing.
Wow.
Thank you.
So if you turn the page, so this kind of just gives a recap of some of our staffing numbers and where we fell this year. And so I'll start with the first page, with the staffing, which correlates a little bit to course selection. So our general education staff, we have a decrease in the number of full-time equivalency. So an FTE is a person, is a teacher. So our change in general education staff is down 5.7 FTE. So a 0.7 is 10 sections is normally what a teacher teaches all year. So 7 out of 10. So, you know, we do have part-time teachers that do teach throughout the year. Special education, we tried to break this down a little bit more than we have in the past into different, and I think we're going to keep working on maybe advancing some of our, you know, reporting on some of these areas. So our change in special ed instructional staff is down 1. Special education other assignments is up, and a change in special education co-taught classes were up 3.0. So co-taught classes are where you have a English class, a math class, where you have a regular education teacher and a special education teacher in there. So the increase this year is the change really of the number of co-taught classes at Vernon Hills. And we truly believe that this model for our students is a good teaching model. And we've been doing more classes at Libertyville with the co-taught model. And so now incorporating that at Vernon Hills. So that's where that increase is. This does not. Yep.
So the co-taught classes allow students with both special ed kids and regular ed kids to be in a classroom together.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just wanted to clarify.
Mm-hmm. And this does not include the District 128, the transition pathway program. So we just finished up that sectioning today. So I might be able to just fill you in on a little bit of that. And then our English learner staff. So our change in our English learner staff is up 0.9 across the district. Some other staffing changes. So some non-instructional positions. So last year we had Avelina Cortez was hired at 0.6. So he's an English teacher. So 0.6 as our dean. And we want to increase that position by 0.4, but we're really looking at the climate and outreach leader. So we're looking, again, this not to deal with discipline, but to work at the overall health of our student. And so we want to increase that position in our LSTs at Vernon Hills. Some of our other positions that, you have your Director of Equity and Inclusion, Director of Data and Assessment that are being hired, but then equity coordinators in the building went down by 0.6. We still have equity coordinators in the building. And this is what we had presented earlier in the fall. And then instructional coaches went down by 0.4. And then our data coordinators, again, we're hiring a Director of Data and Assessment. And then we took some of the FTE out of the building, although each building still has 0.4 FTE in the building. And same with equity, each building has 0.4 in the building plus the director.
So those are both down because of the hires of the directors.
Correct, yes.
Perfect.
And just kind of trying to give you an overall picture of where, we're at with staffing. Then total instructional staff, when you look at your change in general education staff, you look at your special education and your change in English learners, you're down, we're down 0.8. So how does that equate really to when you look at course requests across the district? So if you go to the next page, so our course requests and enrollment changes. So Libertyville High School is down 300 course requests and down 25 students. Vernon Hills is down 57 students and down 239 course requests.
Explain what a course request is.
So one, like if I sign up for math, that's one course request. If I sign up for English, so
So basically, if students' schedule is 7 course requests.
typically 6 to 7 in a lunch period, yeah. Students receiving special education services. So going into next year, we have a change at Libertyville, up 13 students, and then up 16 students at Vernon Hills. Typically, that is your seniors are exiting and you have freshmen. So it looks like that our freshman and senior classes, there's a difference there. English learners. So going back to the first page where we had an increase in our English learner services of 0.9, LHS has a change in 1 student, but Vernon Hills has a change in 19 students. And so that, is a big difference. Some of the other, kind of metrics that we've looked at in the past is the course request per student on average. So Libertyville is averaging 6.41. Vernon Hills at 6.63 this next year. And those are pretty typical in line with what they've done. Our last page then is just kind of mapping out our previous course requests and FTE changes, over the years. And so you can see, looking the district overall, going back to 17, 18, we have increased every year up to 2020, 2021, we increased every year. And we've seen a little bit of a decrease. So like in 2021, we increased 713 and we had a larger FTE change. And this is just general education change in FTE. Kind of mapping that. So part of that is to see, is there a correlation? Is there a similarity that as our course requests increase, we're seeing an increase in FTE, or if our course requests decrease, we're seeing a change the other way. And you can kind of see, I think, from both schools and, from the district that seems to, work out. So after all the work that was done in the buildings, all the work that was done at district, looking at that, we look at, is there some kind of, is it matching up with what we went through?
Do we have any idea why Libertyville has 25 fewer students, but 317 fewer course requests? That means that individuals are taking 6 classes instead of 7 or 5 classes instead of 6.
Yeah, I was wondering that too, and I looked at it again and I could dig deeper into that, why that.
Because that's kind of big.
Yeah.
Do special ed students enroll in fewer courses than regular ed students?
Typically, I wouldn't say,
They have a double math class.
some of the in-program classes that they sign up for. But they would still be in the course.
Yeah, well, they're still in the course
Right.
request. I wouldn't say there's a
That wouldn't
difference.
account for
No.
it then.
It could be one of the differences between the schools is that at Libertyville, students can sign up for early release or late start, open first period or an open eighth period. And that's not the current practice at Vernon Hills. So we could be seeing that as showing up in
Shift,
some of our
yeah.
staffing requests.
And do you happen to remember roughly how many students at Libertyville High School are taking part of that late start or early release?
Oh, I had the number
did.
somewhere.
Mhm.
I'll see if I can
Vernon
find
Hills
that.
students have an opportunity to do that. If they have a job, they can apply for an early release, but it's not in the course request numbers.
Right.
It comes after the fact.
I'm just, my questions are just sort of trying to account for what
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
difference, that 317 drop would be, because I noticed the same
I
thing.
think it was over 100 students had requested early release.
I
or
think
late
it was
start.
close to that.
So if there was a significant increase in students that were participating in that, that could definitely add to the difference, the lowering of the course requests.
You're talking about just the 317 versus prior year.
Mhm.
You have 25 fewer students, too, so 25 times
6 or 7.
courses
Right, that
would
wouldn't,
account for
some of it.
some of it.
Mhm. The other thing is, I know some students were taking 8 classes and the counselors and other support personnel have been trying to counsel students to not do that, to take a lunch. So without digging deeper, I think there could be, a few students for a couple different reasons, but if you're interested, we could try and find out more.
No, I was just curious. I don't think that's, I'm not concerned about that.
But
Yes, I was also just curious.
Yeah.
And can I real quick ask, hi, guys. Is there anything that we could be doing that would enhance this experience? Like, do you have access to the agenda? You have the thing that we're going over right now. Can you hear us okay? Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's right. They're here for AP government class.
Excellent.
And welcome. I'm sorry, I should have acknowledged you earlier. Thank you for coming.
Who's your AP Gov teacher? Tell him we say hello. Bring him our regards. Thank you.
So the next piece I want to walk through is what will the decision, the employment of staff. So if you go to the first page, so our continuing employment for first year non-tenured faculty. So these are first year non-tenured staff. We also have one staff member that was part-time before. And so this would be her first year as a full-time non-tenured staff. So they are going to be renewed and coming back for next year. So our staffing works out that we have positions for them. Our second year non-tenured staff. So again, it's second year of full-time employment. So these are our second years that will be employed for the 22-23 school year. And then the third page is our third year non-tenured faculty that we're also recommending being placed on tenure. And the reason that they'll be placed on tenure after 3 years is that they have 3 excellence on their evaluation. So rather than the 4-year tenure, they have accelerated tenure for 3 years and they'll be placed on tenure. They really technically receive tenure at the end of the school year. So that's when, but they have positions for next year and they'll be then tenured at the end of the school year.
And we'll get a separate motion at that point in time.
No,
Vote on that, or
so,
will we vote
so
for the
you'll,
tenure here?
so the continuing employment, you'll take action on. There is no action that you take on tenure. They
Okay,
get
okay.
tenure at the,
The sheer
at-
fact they'll continue to the next year
Yep.
will automatically grant them tenure.
Yep. And then the next page is third year non-tenured faculty. They will be employed for next year, but they did not receive accelerated tenure, so they'll come back for their fourth year. And then they would, depending on evaluations, then at the end of their fourth year. So that's why there's two different memos really for the third year piece. And then our last one is a fourth year teacher that will be placed on tenure. So she's finishing her fourth year and she'll be placed on tenure at the end of the school year. And then if we go to the next page, so this is the non-renewal of non-tenured part-time faculty. So all part-time faculty will be dismissed and released at the end of the year. Some of them then will also be asked back for positions. You will have to vote and pass a resolution for part-time. So, and then they'll get a letter from us. Now, there's really the notification of them. Number one, we've had personal conversations with them that this is coming because their names will become public in the board document so that they understand what that means, that they're being released as part-time teachers according to the state of Illinois. Once you pass the resolution, they will have a letter that's signed by the board. We'll personally give them that letter, and then they'll also receive one certified mail. But our resolution says that they will personally receive that letter. And we do that because, again, we're dealing with personnel, and that's the right thing to do, is to talk. So conversations have already happened, and then they'll get a personal letter handed to them, and then they'll get the certified letter. Like I said, then as we finish up staffing, some of our staff will be asked back. When we then, finish up, and if we do ask any of our part-time staff back, they also receive, so that you guys would hire them again back in April. And then I try to follow up with a nice email to them saying, we're asking you back for April. Because, that is still tough. You're still getting a certified letter in the mail. And, and we want to honor them, that if they're asked back, we will give them follow-up. And then the last page is the honorable dismissal of full-time faculty. So we have a couple that due to our sectioning and staffing, we don't have a full-time position for them. So you will need to so you'll have a resolution for them also. You'll vote on that resolution, and then they'll get a signed letter from the board. Again, we've already had conversations with all of these individuals. They'll get handed a personal copy, and then they'll get a certified copy. And the last one was they were covering a leave of absence, but they did it all year. And so we still need to honorably dismiss them at the end of the year because they worked the full year.
So two of them will be rehired as part-time,
Correct.
and
Yes.
then the third is released.
Yeah.
and-
Yeah.
Okay.
And they knew she knew it was just a 1 year.
Got it.
So although we went over it in P&P, this will not be under the consent agenda. And the reason it's not under a consent agenda is that it's not something we normally do once every month. And we feel that it should be, a separate item under the P&P committee piece and not under consent.
Makes sense.
And I'll go over it again then. And when we get our new board docs, I won't give this to you in a paper copy next year. I will give it to you in the board doc section.
Excellent. Other than the transition pathway program, do you anticipate any changes between now and the board meeting?
I do not.
Thank you. And would you say, is it fair to characterize, since we're down 82 total in enrollment in the district, is it fair to characterize, because our FTE really is not going to change, because it's going down a net 0.8 and there's a 1 FTE contingency request, so kind of seems sort of neutral,
Mhm.
but we have 82 fewer students. So is it fair to characterize it that our investment per student has gone up for next year?
Dan, would that be how it's calculated?
Our FTE per student is increased.
I would say yes.
Because I know at the state level, they track cost per student in each district. And it seems that this would drive our investment per student up.
All else being equal, yes, but there are a number of things that go into that calculation.
Okay,
That could change it either way.
okay.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
One
something
thing
to
to
note.
note in addition
Go ahead.
is that at Vernon Hills, we reached the number of students of the same language group that requires us to establish a transitional bilingual program. So the increase that you see in the EL staff is related to the creation, that transition in how we offer our EL programming at Vernon Hills as well. So that would be, not an apples to apples comparison, that extra staff is needed to staff the general education courses that EL students are taking with someone who speaks Spanish.
Yeah, and along the same line, a large portion of the offset of that is we're down 5.7 in general education, but the special education numbers went up by 3.6. So a lot of that offset was serving the needs of the students more effectively or more appropriately, or maybe even legally, what we have to do.
Mhm.
So it's, you're correct in saying, yeah, it's a greater investment per student, but there's also an important investment that it's not just we're ramping up the dollars per student. In general, we're doing it in some targeted EL,
For sure.
special ed.
And I think Brian did an excellent job of breaking down the data so that we
Yeah.
can really see what's driving that greater investment.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this document? Will these motions come as part of the PNP or will they be general board
No, they'll be part of PMP.
PNP? Okay,
Yeah.
just to be sure to.
And just to warn a couple people, you'll have a lot more documents to sign, letters. So,
I won't make plans for right after the board
yeah,
meeting.
sorry. Don too.
Oh, what?
We're gonna be
be
signing a lot
signing
of
a lot.
stuff.
Signing,
Oh.
you have, because you have to sign
Correct.
all the letters
from
for
your
all
wrist
those
up really good.
individuals.
Yes,
So, I'm just giving you a heads
I'm
up.
all good.
Okay,
I have my pen. I'm ready to
all
go.
right,
Mhm.
thank you.
Okay,
Go
and
ahead.
then we had a few other, not on this list, just some certified replacement, education support retirement, staff transfer and a coaching replacement.
Mhm.
Any questions or comments or any additional information you have, Brian, on those? Those are pretty.
Nope.
routine. And those will be part of the consent.
Those will be part of consent.
Okay. Okay, well, good with that. Okay, we have some educational tours, some really good ones too.
Yeah, so the first tour that will occur during this school year is the Fbla state competition tour, which is similar to educational tours that we've been approving during this school year. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about that. But we do have 3 educational tour proposals for the 22-23 school year that are being proposed according to the new guidelines we've adopted for domestic and international travel experiences that occurred during school breaks. Each of these tours, all of the participants will be purchasing cancel for any reason insurance should anything occur that the trip would have to be postponed or canceled at the last minute. So happy to answer any specific questions you have, but the major highlight is that the 3 domestic and international trips for the next school year are following the new guidelines that we've discussed related to educational travel post-COVID.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is so exciting to see these trips happening again and the planning for them. I was looking over everything, in the proposals and just the request forms. But one thing that stuck out to me on these 2 European trips was the travel advisory.
Yes.
And so the only question I have, I'm sure there's good reason,
Yeah.
but why do we make the recommendation to support these trips, even though the travel advisory is elevated?
Right. So the current travel advisory is elevated and we're aware of that. And thank you for asking. I meant to bring that up as well. The hope is that as these trips approach the date in which the dates that they intend to travel, that advisory will go down. If not, again, we have the ability to cancel the trips should that advisory remain high. So these are highly anticipated regular experiences that our families and community is looking forward to engaging in again. But much of Europe is under these higher travel advisories at this time. And the hope is that as we monitor them, and we do monitor them periodically approaching the trip. So we don't just wait until the month before the trip and say, oh my, the travel advisory is still high. We have, my assistant actually places this on the calendar and does a regular review of where the travel advisory is, as the sponsoring chaperones do as well.
And
So
oh,
it is an appropriate concern, but a risk that we thought was worthwhile given the the
Can I continue with
value
that
of
thought?
these experiences and the
I was
expectations.
gonna refine one quick thing. if
Go ahead.
it's Okay.
Yeah.
So these are a year off. I mean, there's plenty of time, number
Right.
one, but number two, these advisories can happen for any number of reasons, but my assumption would be this is based on a COVID concern more than anything else currently.
Potentially,
Yeah.
and also potentially the situation in Europe.
Security, yeah. Okay,
Well, if they're going to Paris, there's often advisories
Yeah.
there because of demonstrations that occur.
Generally, most countries are at a level 2 travel advisory. So to see something higher than that would result in us choosing not to travel to that location. Generally, when it's higher than 2, we review that request and make the decisions like we made during 2020 to put a halt on things. So
Is there a
time we're
scenario?
protected with insurance, but
Right.
it's not 100%, but as close as 100% as we can get. In many cases, it is 100%. Some of the fine arts tours, none of the companies go up to 100%, but we have also a waiver for families to sign that they recognize what is guaranteed and what is not, and that they're responsible for any loss that might occur.
Is there a scenario where we would go ahead and travel even if there was a level 4 advisory to not travel?
That's a good question, and I don't have an immediate answer for that. I think we would have a serious conversation about it in consultation with you.
I have a question. Oh, sorry. Can you just explain the difference between the FBLA trip and the other trips in the form of the cost allocation?
Yes, groups that qualify for state competitions, generally the district supports the cost for that. It's like in an athletic competition, when teams have qualified for a state event, those costs are covered by the district, not by families.
and so that's a budgeted expense?
yes.
Thank you.
And then I have one other question for the future. The waiver that we have right now is COVID specific. Do we see the language of that changing in the future so that it just says illness or?
Yeah, we did update the waiver to be pretty general, but I
Because
will
the one that
verify that
the
again.
one that's in the packet, it is COVID specific. And it even says like, if someone should happen to be quarantined as a result of COVID or an exposure to COVID, then these are what the protocols would be. But 5 years from now,
Right,
we would still want to have
yes.
some sort of a
Exactly.
waiver.
Mhm.
So that's just something to think about for the future. For right now, I think they're fine, but a year from now, they may not be.
I think the intent was to make sure parents are aware as they're signing up their students for these trips, what is and what isn't covered by the insurance, and to make it clear that the district isn't responsible for
Right.
whatever that gap is if they're choosing to go on this trip.
Yeah, and the first paragraph of the waiver is pretty general and not
Yeah.
specific to COVID. So that
Correct.
was intended to cover kind of any situation.
Right.
And I appreciate the inclusion for the trip requests, the access to all explanation, and how the sponsors intend to make the cost accessible to any student that wants to participate.
Thank you. That's something we've talked about for a long time. It's not perfect yet, but it is, we've alerted anyone who's planning these trips that that is the expectation.
Can we go with?
Maybe. There have been times when they needed additional chaperones.
Mhm.
Duly noted.
I can be reached on short notice.
Sarah, I'll find a sitter. It's not.
Have passport will chaperone.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Actually did go on one, but I wasn't a board member yet. So
yes.
Well,
not that that would have stopped me.
You probably were a board member, knowing you, just not in 128 yet. Were you 73?
Yeah, no, I was off the board there by then. Yeah,
Okay.
it was in between. Yeah. Yeah, like 2000, something like that. Anyway, okay. Anything else on the trips? Okay, moving on, textbook adoption requests.
So what you have in front of you is a summary of the work that's taken place by district teams to recommend and adopt a new textbook. So a bit of background on the textbook adoption process. If you look to the right of the summary, there's a 5-year summary of costs. So the first piece of background, if you go back to 2015-16 and see that $395,000 adoption request amount in that year. Since that time, that was a year when there was a 5-year almost automatic renewal of textbooks that teams were accustomed to and kind of automatically said every 5 years we get a new textbook. And so back during that time, we said, let's take a look at, do we really need a hard copy textbook every 5 years with the availability and accessibility of online resources, some of them free. And so teams have, slowed down really this automatic process and looked intentionally at the value of the textbook they're using and the degree to which they're using ancillary sources that might be available free and online to students. So that's been one piece of it. The other piece is that there was hope that e-textbooks would be would reduce the cost of purchasing textbooks, would be easy to use and provide access to resources in a way that would work well for teachers and students. And some of that has happened, but really not much at all. So generally, most textbooks are purchased in a bundle that includes the electronic version of the text at about the same cost as it would be to buy either the e-text or the hard copy text at the same time. And so there's been some reduction in our textbook costs, but not as much as one might have hoped, given the textbook industry and the changes that really haven't occurred in the cost of purchasing textbooks for students. One thing to note on this set of adoption requests is that in social studies, AP psychology at Vernon Hills, the request is to purchase what is a renewable resource rather than a hard copy textbook. So what they are doing is keeping the old version of the hard copy textbooks for students to access and providing students annually with what is a well-recognized and often used study resource with sample questions and the ability to take notes in that renewable resource. What they're asking for is a text that costs $19.95 a year that they will purchase annually for all the students enrolled in AP psychology. I can answer any questions about the other texts, but again, the process that teams use is to develop a district-wide team in consultation with their department supervisors, review how the text aligns to the essential course curriculum, as well as to the needs of the students who might be enrolled in that course, the reading level and the ancillary resources that the text provides. Many of these adoptions this year, the first several on the list, are for AP texts. Those texts are also included in a syllabus that AP teachers submit to the College Board for an audit, and the College Board reviews text selection as well as ancillary resources before approving the audit for teachers. So these are pretty standardly used texts at the AP level, and those text selections are also reviewed by the College Board when they approve a teacher's audit.
I just want to check in and make sure I understood correctly for the AP Psych at Vernon Hills. Oh, I see. 120 per year for 5 years. That's
Yes.
why it's 13,000. Okay. I answered my own question. Thank
Mhm.
you.
It seems like a lot of these, and you commented on that, are AP courses.
Yes,
And it seem that they're a little more structured, a little more, strict in terms of what materials you can use in those courses. So
it is
It
part of
makes-
their audit of
Yeah.
each teacher's course. That before you can teach an AP course, you have to submit your syllabus and other materials for the College Board to review and audit and approve district-wide.
And it's pretty detailed.
Yeah,
It's a
Mhm.
Yeah.
thorough
Yeah.
audit.
yeah. I remember when it started and I was an AP teacher submitting my syllabus. It's been going on for quite a few years. But
Mhm.
it is a process to ensure that if you're calling a course AP, that it meets the rigor
Yeah.
and the standards of the College Board. The other thing of note is that in chemistry, the adoption chemistry honors says LHS only. That's an intentional move to align the adoption year for Libertyville and Vernon Hills. Vernon Hills reviewed the text with Libertyville and is waiting until this renews again, potentially 6 years from now, to adopt the same text at Libertyville at the same time. So they get on the same timeframe of adoption.
That was actually my question.
I'm
Because I've
glad I-
not seen this before. Why, for example, you've got VHHS and LHS both have slightly different textbooks for economics.
And the answer for economics is that at Libertyville, both micro and macroeconomics are taught. They take two AP exams. At Vernon Hills, the only macro is offered and one exam is, students take one exam unless they prep individually for the other, and some students take both on their own. The rationale for that has been when those courses were introduced at Vernon Hills with the smaller population at Vernon Hills, running singleton courses can be very difficult to get the adequate enrollment to go. And teachers then have also a variety of preps with those numbers of singletons, and with fewer teachers, being able to offer every AP offering in a discipline becomes sometimes rather difficult, both for students to take and teachers to teach. That is under review and in discussion among the departments. Should the courses be aligned district-wide, or do we still have a situation where it might be more challenging to offer certain courses at Vernon Hills, given the number of students, as those numbers get closer as well? That seems to be a logical question and a logical next step. The total population of students, the numbers I was referring to.
Is there a way that for any course that's not offered at one building but is offered at the other, now that we have technology, is it possible for a student at one school to enroll in a course at the other virtually? Because with transportation issues, it's really too difficult to get a student from one building to the other without reducing the number of courses they can enroll in.
We are discussing that. We discuss it in staffing, and we also look at, if there are insufficient numbers of students at one school, and potentially at both schools, there are insufficient numbers for the course to run. Can we offer that at one school and include the students from both schools, either in a virtual way for one school, or to have that teacher travel to both sites and teach from each location a number of days a week? One example of that is the Calculus 3 class that you approved for this coming year. We're looking at how might we combine that class to provide a single teacher the opportunity to offer that dual credit course to students at both Vernon Hills and Libertyville with limited enrollment numbers. So we do look at that as a potential solution. The logistics can be hard, and not all students prefer that experience when they select a course. So we continue to look at how can we offer that opportunity? How can we make it appealing to students and ensure that it's successful, that they are successful in the course? And how can we perhaps travel the teacher so that that teacher is in person in both locations on occasion?
Interesting.
Rita, I'm asking a question more to like educate myself. 'Cause
Sure.
I've never been on this side of
Yeah,
looking at
sure.
this globally. When I was looking at it, I mean, almost all of the resources are going towards AP. So I just was asking like a general
Good
question.
question.
So in a standard, I don't want to say regular base, but a standard class, do they have opportunities to renew? and
Yes.
To have their texts reviewed and updated and
Yes.
purchased? And what is that rotation?
Yeah. So this is actually an unusual year. It's kind of surprising when I saw these are mostly AP texts. Most years that there are varied offerings on the textbook adoption list. All courses generally use this. Now we've said start looking your 6th year rather than your 5th year. Any course we offer has a periodic review where they review their materials and choose to request or not request a new textbook. So it's an unusual year that most of the adoptions are in AP courses. Generally, they
Is it
are.
just because they're not going through the same kind of critique through the AP board that?
No. Any of our courses have the opportunity to review and request an adoption in consultation with their department supervisors on a regular basis. Because so many of our teachers are using free online resources, those textbooks just last longer. Sometimes we're renewing the e-text or the e-licenses that teams are using to support their text more regularly than we're renewing the actual physical hardcover text. So every team has the opportunity to propose, but I'm seeing an increasing number of teams who are curating their own resources to supplement that text and making the course, the course is updated annually with the new resources that are available, really, because you're relying on those kinds of online authentic texts and documents. That's a constant renewal and a constant looking for fresh.
Oh, and we don't
ways to
see the
incorporate text.
renewal of the e-license in here all the time. That just
Anything that is being renewed or purchased, additional copies or additional licenses is not presented in
Right.
this format. Thank you for asking. This is just the proposed new text that the board hasn't reviewed previously that are being adopted. So the other, if you would like to view any of these sources, we have available texts. They're available at the schools. I could bring them to the board meeting for you to review if you were interested.
No, I was just asking the question more about. do we
Yes,
have the
I
opportunity-
understood that question, and it's a very good question, Cara, because it does appear to be really AP heavy here. But that is not the case at all. Every course has a regular opportunity. They choose whether to follow this 6-year cycle or to prolong the text because they're using other resources or the text hasn't changed, or they don't see anything better than what they're currently using. So if they have increased numbers of students taking the course, they purchase that same text, additional copies in additional years. So the textbook budget itself is larger than what you see here as well. This is the budget for new adoptions, not replacement text or renewed licenses.
Not only is Calculus 3 honors completely intimidating to me, even the name of the textbook is intimidating. Calculus Early Transcendental.
Yes. The great news about that is it is in the process of becoming a dual credit course. So students will, rather than take an exam to earn college credit, will complete the course and have a transferable credit through CLC.
Oh, that is good news.
Yeah.
How many students do we have?
A small number at each school, something, when you combine the two, something over 20, mid-20s.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Rita. That's
you.
good information. Future agenda items. Anyone have a future agenda item? I'm actually going to circle back around to the communications agenda item. I forgot to mention this earlier, coming off the public comment. And we briefly mentioned this before, but I wanted to get sort of a pulse for what the board feels about email public comments in the future. So, we started that when we were in remote. We were all remote. The only way we could get public comment was via email. we continued doing that up until this point in time, because we felt that there was still a need to, I feel, to include those folks that didn't feel comfortable coming in. I think in my opinion, we're at a point now where everyone has the opportunity to come in. I think from a safety perspective, there shouldn't be an expectation of continuing the remote practices. And I think there might even be at some point in time, some concern about that, because I think there were some rules that changed from a state level that allowed for that, just like it allowed for us to have remote meetings. But I wanted to bring that topic up just to see if anyone had a concern or a comment related to that practice, and if we would want to consider removing that in the future.
Do you want our opinion now, or do we want to put it on the agenda?
Well, we have a communication agenda item here. Are you saying on the actual board meeting agenda? I mean, it doesn't require a vote. We didn't take a vote to put that in place. It's more of, I think, a guidance to the administration on the process of.
I think because we instituted it due to COVID, I think it's fine to discontinue it. People can still email the board, and emails that are
Right.
sent to the board, every board member
We still
receives it.
read.
So I don't think it, due to the current climate and COVID mitigations that are in place, I don't see any reason to continue it unless I'm missing something. But I'm open to, if there's something I'm not considering.
Yeah.
Did we have any requests or do we have any comments for either of the meetings tonight? That kind of tells you that it's
Yeah,
not
it's
as necessary.
off.
Yeah.
I don't see a downside to continuing email communication. What's the downside?
Well, it lengthens the amount of time that our meetings are.
I don't see the downside as much as I see maybe a lost opportunity if we keep it. I personally, as a board member, in my experience, I enjoy when people come and speak to us in person and we can see them and hear them. And I feel in many cases there's more respectful exchange of ideas, or not really an exchange because we don't communicate back during public comment, but there's an air of respect that's maintained differently when people are in person versus commentary maybe had through email. So I agree with you. There's no downside to maintaining it, but I feel that an opportunity could be lost if we encourage people, if people don't see that we're encouraging them to comment in person. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think if we're trying to have I see both sides,
Yeah.
but in an effort of transparency and a welcoming, and especially since most people are not taking advantage of it, at least we should give some time frame of saying this is when we're not going to, since we've set. the
Oh, sure,
precedent.
sure. Yeah.
But I kind of we don't engage in a conversation anyway.
Right.
I think there's a position of, if somebody wants to write the letter, they want it to be public and not just to the board. And we can handle it. And unless it is taking up an exorbitant amount of time, which it's not really at this point, that maybe that is more of a olive branch of transparency and welcoming people into this participation and what they're comfortable doing. But it also lends itself open to somebody who gets really mad and just fires off an email.
Yeah.
I get that too.
Yeah.
But, we have to balance. And if we want to look like we want to be welcoming, that we do welcome everybody.
Yeah.
Then we have to welcome them.
And I would be curious, I don't think that allowing email public comment violates any open meeting act.
Yeah, I
Because
don't
there are
recall-
other districts that even before COVID allowed phone public comment. They'd have a phone line set up for people to leave a message and it was played at the board meeting. So if that was permissible under the Open
Yeah.
Meetings Act, I don't think any changes to the virtual emergency rules that would apply to us for our meeting.
Yeah.
Would apply to
I couldn't
email
recall
public
whether
comment.
that is. I don't know if anybody here remembers. It seems so
Just
long
took
ago.
My OMA training and I don't recall that being part of it.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's been I think it's because someone's coming to talk to you during your meeting time, again, you're meeting in public, it's not a public meeting. And so I think when I think about the intent of public comment, it is for them to share their perspective on something that's on the agenda or something that's not on the agenda. And so I think when it is emailed to you, it's more like a written correspondence, like any other person who wants to email something to you. So I think it's really your preference. I don't think it's an Open Meetings Act question.
Yeah, I think, in the case of transparency, and that goes both ways because the email is sort of an anonymous, even though it might look like it comes from their address or they might sign their name. It is an anonymous, electronic communication. It's not them looking us and presenting and we lose some of their intent, their emotion, their whatever with whatever topic they're trying to portray. And it
Although
isn't.
Mary does read with emotion.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
She's had a lot
It's-
of that.
Yeah.
It's also anonymous anyway, because they're not required to give their name. They can just walk up and speak. They don't have to say who they are or where they're from.
Right, but it's different if I'm, and we've all seen
Right.
those communications that if it's written and you're not looking the person in the face, it's a different experience than if you're, presenting your case in person.
We did not allow anonymous
Anonymous.
letters to be
Right.
submitted.
Right,
They would be
But-
shared with the
but-
board, but not read
Right.
during public comment.
right.
There is something
And
to be said, I think because of some of the divisiveness about some of the things over the last 2 years, there were people that emailed public comment because they didn't want to get into a confrontation with somebody that might have a different opinion. And I see the point of not wanting to restrain anybody from being able to make public comment for whatever reason they might prefer to email, whether it's their schedule doesn't permit them to attend or because of, a variety of reasons. So, I could certainly see the argument being made that there really isn't a downside, especially since in, the last few meetings, I think for the board meeting, we had one. So I don't know.
I mean, that's where I was coming from. If you look outside, people are starting to do more and more remote and in-person work is starting to diminish. I would be in favor of keeping it just because it opens more opportunities for more people to participate than what if they can't come into the location at a given time. So. I mean, if it becomes excessive, we can evaluate that, but that's what I would say.
Casey, what are you thinking?
I
see
don't
both
have a
sides.
strong feeling
I
either
really
way.
don't, I'm kind of conflicted, but not really, because either one has positives. We could say we're gonna make email public comment available through the rest of this school year, if we wanted to look at it that way. I personally like when people come and interact with us. Sometimes they even stay and they might learn a few things and they may, you know what I mean? I like to encourage people to attend in person. I know when I was a community member who would attend in person, I learned a lot just by listening. Email comment does not offer them that. But I don't see any harm in the email comments either. So I'm wishy-washy.
And now, I don't think we have any intention to take away the Zoom link.
Correct.
So people, whether or not they want to come for public comment, have the opportunity to either attend in person or view the board
Right.
meeting virtually. So,
And in reality, it's only Zoom because that's the platform of convenience. It's not like the public's interacting with us via Zoom. It's more like a live stream kind of
Exactly.
scenario.
Right.
Exactly.
And also gives us the opportunity if we needed to chime in remote. Although I don't know if those rules will change at some point in time and how that impacts.
We can also just quickly check with OMA rules just to
Yeah.
verify that our assumption is correct, that they're continuing with that, doesn't have any negative
And I think
ramifications.
in addition, I think that's an excellent suggestion. In addition, I think we have to match it up with our board policy and make sure that if there are any changes that we intend to make permanent as a
There-
result of the last
Right.
2 years, that we update our board policy so that what we're doing is consistent with the policy.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. I mean, it's,
Mhm.
it's a worthwhile topic to discuss whether we,
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
And we'll have more to come on this. We'll do a little homework and
And just to foreshadow the April committee meeting, we will have our first annual report to the board on our equity policy.
Good.
So we're very excited to share the data we've been able to gather and our initial recommendations.
okay. That, anything for other? We don't have an other, but I think we're adjourned then. Thank you. Want to take a
Almost did it
5-minute
in under
break?
an hour.
Yeah.
Cops all over the place. So I asked one of the cops, what's going on over there? He
Are we
said,
live?
oh, it's a new iPhone.
I mean, I'm seeing it across.
That's people that are going.
Technically, it's
iPhone.
technically it's 10 more seconds.
iPhone early adopters.
Yeah.
Are we
It's
ready
funny.
to go?
I'm ready.
Okay. Alrighty
We
then.
can pipe down
Let's,
here.
Let's call to order the Facilities and Finance Committee meeting for Monday, March 14th. We've already done the pledge, so we will move on to invitation for public comment. Still don't want, are you sure? And Mary, you said there was no email public comments. Okay. All right, reviewing the agenda, we're going to look at the February committee minutes, capital projects update, discuss the 5-year financial projections, discuss some bids and contracts, as well as some upcoming bids and contracts. There is no disposal of obsolete equipment, and then we have a list of future agenda items. So starting with the review of February committee minutes, any comments? Concerns? Okay, moving on, capital projects update.
All right, kind of realized the data I have in here includes stuff from later in the agenda, so I'll just mention them briefly here as well. But we have a updated list for you, really based on other conversations we had, just trying to make sure we put everything together for everybody. So we have our list of summer capital projects. So the list, there's a few columns there. There's an estimated column. That was what we presented to you back in January of the things on our project list. And at that time, we had things moved over to the right. Those are the things in yellow that are moved all the way farther away on the right, just because there's just not quite enough there to get it done. So our projects have ranged over several years, 3 to 4 million. It's been closer to 3.1, 3.2 million lately. So we had an estimate of 3.4 with a decent sized project, the fax slabs renovation in this building. 1.5, we believed at that time, was a conservative estimate, kind of hoping that it would come in less and then we could move in some of those other projects in from the right. Well, that didn't happen. Our fax program that came in, the first bid that came in was like 1.3 million, looked great, really exciting. Got a call 2 hours later. 2 hours later, the low bidder realized they forgot to include some things in their bid, and so they're pulling their bid. So our next highest bid was the 1.6 million that you have here. So with plugging that number in, that's not an ideal number, but that number is what it is. You can see the updated total based on everything. And so the greens, those are ones that are already board approved. So those are ones that we've had in previous meetings. So right now our total is sitting at 3.8 million, which is higher than 3.4 million. And quite honestly, frustrating. We don't want to see projects coming in over, but my best sense is that inflation is taking its toll on us more than we probably anticipated. So at this point, really your choices are not to do this project, delay it. It'll probably cost more if you do it later because inflation keeps happening. Or we move forward and it's 3.8 million. So
Dan, I'm assuming you guys have already thought through this, but there's no part of that project that we can make smaller, trim.
at this point, no. So part of the project that was already trimmed early on was the bathrooms. So there's a little line there that says remodel 2 sets of bathrooms at LHS. That was originally part of the project. So those are the bathrooms right next to those labs. We had it incorporated all in there. Once they got further in design and kind of realizing the potential cost for this program, that just became too much. And so those were set aside, those bathrooms. So at this point, I would say there's nothing that you can remove from the project at this point. Plus we have bids that were legally put in, and really the board's only decision that can be with the bids is you either accept a bid or you reject the bids. Those are the only legal options you have.
And are we going to be seeing requests for the 10-year life safety and the Warcheck Stadium electric amounts in addition to the 3.8 million that we've already approved? I'm sorry, minus the fax rooms, which we have not yet approved.
Yeah, those are still on the list. Those are still on the list for right now. The 10-year life safety is a required activity for us to perform according to the state. The word check, there's not as much lead time on that project, so I think that one was doesn't take as long to kind of plan that out. But Mark, do you want to speak anything to that project?
The war check, the electrical upgrades had to do with the use in the building and how the use has increased over the years, and especially COVID put a strain on the electrical system there because of delivery. You know, they couldn't get deliveries like pizza, for instance, pizzas. They couldn't guarantee at the time that they could deliver pizzas every hour. And so they needed more warming ovens and things like that. And the system was already maxed out because it's basically a residential service. And what they did was they put a backup generator in and just used the generator during events.
So my point is, if we approve the remodel of the fax rooms, we will also be asked to approve another $95,000 because of the 10-year life safety and the electrical work that needs to be done. So it's not going to be 3.8, it would actually be 3.9.
No, the 3.8 is inclusive of those costs.
Oh, those are already
It's
included.
everything in that column.
Okay, I
Now,
thought it
that
was
would-
just stuff in green.
Nope, the stuff in green was just board has approved these.
Understood. But the total includes everything.
Yes.
Thank you.
Correct. So it would come down to, you know, as Dan said, the life safety is state required
Mhm.
that we have to do. We don't necessarily have to do the $50,000 at Warcheck. I mean, we have a system there that does run. It has run in the past. We were looking to upgrade there. And then if you look down at Vernon Hills, we also have $90,000 there for carpet replacement that we priced out. Those, if the board chooses not to spend that, the 90 and the 50, you know, that would be your choice, and it would bring us down to approximately 3.7.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that. I'm just wondering if it's worth having a conversation, since the biggest number is the fax rooms, is perhaps postponing that. Not the smaller things.
Yeah. My honest recommendation would not be probably to postpone that because the costs will only go up from there. I think it is more realistic to postpone the electric and the carpet replacements, even though the carpet replacement, we're trying to have a kind of a cycle every year of replacing portions throughout the year, or portions of the building each year. But that's possible as well.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily in favor of postponing the electrical or the carpeting. That wasn't what I was suggesting.
Dan, can you explain to, again, trying to learn, can you explain how the stir and the inspect, how that works at the 7%? I mean, what is, I know that they go through all the bids and they are just, maybe I don't understand it correctly.
So with every capital project that you do, somebody has to design it. So they have to put the drawings, they have to get those very particular specs together, that kind of a thing. So STR is our architect of record. And so whenever we have a project that's big enough to involve them, STR will design it. So it's not just somebody that helps run the bids. That's part of what they do, but they also help design it and then help oversee that it's actually done, that the trade actually does it according to the design that we wanted it to. So
I
they,
didn't understand that. So now-
yeah. So that's part of the process. So pretty much almost every project we would bring has some type of design or management component to it. That at that point, you're essentially having those specialists work on those projects. Does that make sense?
If we postpone remodeling the fax rooms, would it give the opportunity for the lower bidder to reevaluate and resubmit a potentially lower bid? Or is that not?
Based on what they told us they were missing, I don't know that that would be the low bid.
Okay.
And now that information is public and it's tricky. You don't know what contractors would decide to do with that information.
Sure.
Because we do have some pretty on top of it people in the construction field that want to know our bids, like the day we get requests very often the day of to see what our bids were. And we get those very regularly.
I believe it.
Yeah.
And additionally, and forgive me if this is just totally not how things are done, additionally postponing to perhaps have more contractors or other contractors come to bid is not an option. I know you're saying like, there's this practice of other contracting firms coming to find out what that information is immediately. So it could be completely pointless, right? But
What I would say is this is not an ideal season to be doing construction. Supply chain issues, well, we've been dealing with supply chain issues for a while now. So supply chain issues, but also a lot of work out there for them to do. Regardless of that, we still have work that we believe needs to get done. So we have a few different, I guess, competing or maybe a polarity, a few different things going on that appear to conflict with each other. What I would say is, do I think it's realistic that if, say, we reject these bids and bid it later, will we get more contractors? It depends on how later, but we don't know the future. We don't know. And I don't want to say, oh, it's going to be terrible in the future. I'm just saying we don't know the future. And so you could get more, you could get less, you could get lower numbers, you could get higher numbers. We don't know. I think in the inflation environment that we're seeing would lead us to believe that we would see higher numbers, but you honestly don't know until you do it.
and then can I kind of go a step further and ask, is there anything in our recent history that you could point to that would kind of illustrate that further, being that, like, for instance, we had a project in the past that we decided to hold off on. And because we did, due to inflation, increased materials, whatever, this was kind of the, outcome we had not hoped for. Are there any recent projects that you could just bring to mind where that happened? So that if we decided to say, hold off.
Yeah. I'm going to give you an answer, then I'll give Mark a chance to answer.
Okay.
What I more have seen is in this process, it's not just put the bid out and just see what shows up. There are pre-bid meetings that you invite contractors to and you're talking to them. They're asking questions, what's going on. And you kind of get a sense, and especially the consultants that are involved, they kind of know who's in the game. And they kind of talk like, hey, you feel good about putting in a bid? Like, are you going to put in a bid? And they'll say, yeah, this is great. Or yeah, we're a little nervous. Even in this example, our original bid opening was actually last Monday.
Mhm.
But we got a sense talking to some contractors that based on the timing of our bid, they would not be putting in a bid. So we said, well, so typically in those times, and we did it a lot with Gilbane managing all those huge projects that we were doing. What they would do is just delay the bid opening or just say, you know what, we're just gonna push the bid opening back another week to hopefully get more contractors in. We have had great success with that. Didn't work this time. Is that a fair assessment that didn't work this time? We didn't get more contractors that we were hoping to.
We were expecting one more bid and we did not receive that bid.
Yeah, but in terms of answering her other question, was there an example of that where we delayed and it worked in our
We
favor?
haven't had a project that we've delayed in that sense. We've delayed large capital projects for the future, and let's say, for instance, pool. When they originally started looking at that back in 2012, pool was costing $12.5 million, and depending on design, but you have costs go up every year and then it's compounded. So when they the initial shock of, okay, the pool, when we priced out the pool and we were over 30 million, it was like, oh, wow. What do we do? And then we cut back and we cut back and we cut back and we got it down to the 20 million. But so, I mean, that's the only example I can get. We haven't postponed a project just because we thought, we could get better pricing in the future.
Okay.
With this economy, we spoke to the architects about it, and we just don't know. Everything's unstable. All of a sudden, everything was looking good, and all of a sudden, we had a war.
Yeah.
And oil prices went up, and they're predicting, lumber all of a sudden went up. So these contractors are trying to cover themselves just in case, the costs go up. So if you bid it next summer, you're going to have an increase, depending on what what CPI was 7 something here last year, what's it going to be next year? There's no guarantee the prices are going to come down.
And I don't want to try to create arguments to say like, see, we need to keep doing this. I'm trying to give you an objective perspective. And I'm not saying you're suggesting it, but what I'm imagining in my head is, do we wait for like ideal bidding scenarios before doing a project? We usually would not necessarily do that. We would capitalize that if we saw it in the moment. We are largely basing these around the needs that we're seeing going on. And so for instance, there could be other projects like roofing, right? If we need to replace the roof, we're not going to wait until bidding circumstances are better. We need to move forward on that.
Right.
That would be an example. So I would say things like that are tricky.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the context. It's hard sometimes to understand the full scope of the decisions we make when, maybe there isn't a historic example to kind of learn from, but you just painted a much more detailed picture for me. So thank you.
So I know that these are our plans for the summer. I mean, this is our current projected projects. My question is, if I have no problem saying yes to this. One, we have the money. Do we have the money? I mean, we budgeted and we're just over the 150,000, right?
Mhm.
And two, long-term, by saying yes to this remodel, are we affecting the what is out there that we're expecting to be doing in the next couple of years? That's kind of, how does this affect the next projects that need to be done?
Yeah, the biggest effect I would say is actually the projects you already approved. So a lot of those are foundational for the roofing that needs to happen over at Vernon Hills. So those have already been approved and those are moving forward. A number of those things were foundational, like we can't really build this roof until we do these X things. That's really what we've already done here. This project in particular is a bit more standalone. I don't know that it necessarily impacts other future projects.
I think she means money though, too. Like if we overspend on this
Yeah,
project,
no-
is it going to have an impact on some of the things we were expecting to fund in the next year or two?
Yeah, so maybe let me answer the question a different way. How are you going to pay for this overage? What I would say is there's a big difference in an annual cost versus a one-time cost. So if you think about the overage, think of it as, I don't know, $400,000-$500,000, if you want to think of it that way, in the total, right? And what we were talking about. Do you have $400,000-$500,000 to spend one time on something? You absolutely do. And it will not affect anything in the long term. That said, it still kind of feels icky to do it in the year. But you can move forward with projects like this. And I don't know that it would have a material impact on our long-term planning. I think
That's what I'm getting.
one thing that would be more tricky is if we said, let's delay this to a later year. That will impact long-term planning because then by default, you'd have to push something else further out,
And we've
Um,
seen in some neighboring districts where they did that and ran into a big problem. They kept kicking, the difficult maintenance things into the future. And then had serious maintenance issues that they couldn't afford.
If we were going to delay this project, I would want to know what the projects behind it are that would be affected by that would then be kind of shifted to a different year. I don't think we could make that decision.
that would not be, that would not be info I could give you right now. So we, you know, and it's a little bit of a preview for the next presentation we have, but part of the next steps for us is, so we've seen that long-term kind of the state of where it is right now, but really the next steps are going to be finalizing a process for how do things get on that list. And then a process for how are things prioritized on that list, right? Two different things. So those are still in process. But those are kind of the next steps for us in that vein.
I
And
would
it would
think
be
there would
so helpful just to be able to see that long-term plan next to these kind of presentations. You know, when we're looking at a spreadsheet like this, to also have a box that shows what we discussed 2 committee meetings ago, or 3 committee meetings ago, and board docs will help with that, but that long-term capital plan, I think, to have both of those next to each other so that we could see what this is in the context of the longer term plan will be helpful.
Yeah, my
Are
comment
we
was if we did push this off a year, I would be more concerned about the risk of those other projects that would then have to be pushed off. Escalation costs of this. I mean, we're not likely going to save any money by doing that.
Right.
It's going to cost us more next year to do it than it would.
I've never
if we
seen
just did it.
construction costs go down.
Yeah, and the fact that our budget is in pretty good, our spending against budget this year is in pretty good shape, where this wouldn't have a significant negative impact on that. I mean, it's not going to push us into the red based on just this one.
And would we still
$400,000.
be obligated to STR for some of that portion just by the process of what they've done so far?
They did the design already.
I mean, so it still cost us money and we
Yeah.
wouldn't do anything. So that doesn't make sense. We would be out of pocket with no product.
If I understood.
Really good plans for future.
If I understood correctly, you said you would recommend that we go forward with all of this.
Right now, yeah, I'm not recommending changing anything on this list.
The one thing that we haven't mentioned so far is the impact on instruction, because those are instructional spaces. And the reason that we're doing this is because those instructional spaces are deficient right now. They're already deficient.
Yes.
And by doing the projects, we will bring them up to where they need to be so that the kids that are in those classrooms will be getting the instruction that they should have.
Correct. That was part of the reason for why this got on the list in the first place. That, you know, I don't exactly remember our conversation back in January. But yeah, those are for sure reasons why this is on the list. How things get on the list historically have been kind of a little bit of building prioritization, but then also the right timing. So we've got other mandatory things, and then there's some extra room in there that we can do some elective improvements. And so this fit the right description for this year that we could fit it in, or that we believed we could fit it in. It doesn't quite fit, in case you can tell.
You know, just doing the project first, it solves the ventilation issues that we've been having in the space, and we're upgrading the ventilation and putting the proper supply and exhaust in.
And this is
we're
where they're
also-
cooking.
Pardon me?
This is where they're cooking.
This is where they're cooking, yes. And then we're also eliminating the flooring that's in the building, as we've been over the years been abating the asbestos flooring, and then there's pipe insulation buried in the wall. It's not, it's contained. It's not a health issue, but that's been part of our process of what we've been doing, is trying to take some asbestos. And we also know we have HVAC equipment that has to go. And then also this room has the plumbing underneath the building has to be addressed, because it is separated and shifted, and we're having backups. And so those things those 3 components are the reason to do the work initially in this area of the building. The plumbing, HVAC, and then asbestos abatement.
So this space could cause us to have to spend money whether we want to or not if we don't address it now. If
You're going to need to address it at some point.
We're gonna have to address it at some point, and
Okay.
it was on the list.
Dan, I have a question about the contingencies. Those
Yeah.
represent about 10% more than the 3.8, those are not in the 3.8, correct?
Those are inclusive in them. So in theory, so I'll be very honest, in theory.
Yeah.
You could spend less. In reality,
Well, especially,
life finds a way.
yeah. The way it
so-
works right now with inflation, but I do know that Mark and his team work very hard to make sure that we don't have to.
Yeah, and some of those contingencies are material contingencies, unknowns, like once you break, you don't really know what's in the wall. Like, doesn't matter what any drawing says, until you break in that wall, you don't really know what's behind it. So it covers
We've had that
things like that.
A few times.
I have one question. I think some of these answered my questions already, but is our concern right now that we are over the annual budget that we have put in place, like about 400,000?
Well, what I would say is there is no annual budget next year yet.
Okay.
This is more than we've spent in the last few years. This is not more than what we spent ever, not by a long shot. It really had ranged in the 3 to 4 million-ish. Since I've been here, I've been a little bit more stickler, and it's been 3.1, and then having conversations, like you can't just keep this flat. Like this needs to grow because costs grow. And so we've started increasing that as well. So it is a fair conversation of what should the level be. My opinion right now is I think this is still a reasonable range to be in. You could look at data and maybe data says, maybe 4 is the number that you should be at. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves in terms of that conversation.
Because the only thing that was crossing my mind is if we are worried about meeting a number that we've agreed to for a given year, can you time the start of the project so some of the costs go into the next year where you've had time to plan for?
You could if you were on the cash basis of accounting, but not us.
Okay.
You really have to tie it to now. But the way this technically works is it's based on when the work is done. So depends on how much work gets done in June versus July, but summers are always tricky because we want to get in as soon as school is done and get done as soon as we can, because inevitably something happens and you're sometimes backed up right to the start of school. And we try to avoid that, but that is, so what you're explaining, what you're bringing out right now is when I come at the end of the year and this $3 million line item is either over or under, 90% of the time it's timing, because it depends on when they actually do the work is when we actually can attribute those actual expenditures. And that is very, very, very difficult to predict accurately. Like I know how much work they're going to do for the whole project. How much work are they going to do by June 30th is very tricky to know, because there's a lot of things that affect how much work they do by June 30th, which to be honest is just an arbitrary date. It happens to be our fiscal year end date, which is a very important one. But in terms of summer projects, like it's a little difficult.
Okay, thanks.
So Dan, will we be asked to vote on this, approve this bid?
That's what I would recommend,
Okay.
unless you all want to tell me something different. So, but actually you have to take some action on this. You don't have a choice. You have to either vote for this or reject the bid.
Yes, or reject the bid because we've gone through the process. Okay. Any other questions on this one?
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the 5-year financial projections. Lots of very detailed and very important information in here.
All right. One second, I've got to share my screen with all of our attendees online. Looks good. All right.
Have there been any changes since you sent it to us?
I'm thinking. I don't believe so.
Okay.
When did I send it to you? Friday?
Friday,
Right.
Thursday.
I don't think so.
Right.
Nothing material anyways. All right, you ready? Can you all see, by the way? Can you see? Okay, sorry. I know they kind of scooted it down to see.
Down here.
You guys see the better.
All right, 5-year financial projections. So I wanted to start with why. Why are we doing this? I'm reading a good book on that talks about starting with the why. So that's why I'm doing this. So why are we doing this? Well, let's step back and talk about big picture, our mission as a district. So our mission is to develop graduates who are daring, right? Dreamers and doers, aware, resilient and healthy, inquisitive, nimble, global. So we have our daring mission. And how do we actually do this? The way we functionally do this is by facilitating and supporting learning. So really everyone that's in the building, every dollar that we spend should be to either facilitate or support learning. Everyone here, we all support learning, right? How we actually support learning is three primary ways. We have our staff, so the people that we hire. We've got services that we contract with, and then we buy supplies and equipment, pencils, back slabs, things like that. But those things, the staff, services, supplies, and equipment, those come at a cost. They're not free. So really what we're trying to do is look at those costs and try to understand what are those costs doing over time. And then the next step is for us to figure out, can we afford these costs over time? That's what this process is meant to do, all right? So the first step on our journey is to look at historical analysis. So let's look at what's happened, and we're looking at other fiscal conditions. So the first thing we do is we look at the past. So where we've been, that's going to be the 5 fiscal years previous to now. So fiscal years 17 to 21. We look at our current conditions, fiscal year 22, what's happening right now. So that's where we are. And then where we're heading, the future, which is going to be the future 5 fiscal years. So 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. Why do we go 5 years and not 10? Because anything beyond 5 is garbage data, I would say. 5 is very helpful. The first few years are really accurate, and that's really what you want to look at. The longer term, less reliable. So we take those in strides. So before I get much further, let me talk about what we look at when we're looking at both the historical and even our actual projection results. What we're going to look for each fiscal year is, do we have a surplus or not? So that means in a given fiscal year, do the revenues exceed expenditures? Next thing we look at is fund balances. So how do, excuse me, how do those fund balances change over time? And particularly, I look at what is the fund balance percentage of expenditures over time, because that is that gives you a sense of changing financial strength or position. The final thing we look at is revenue trends relative to expenditure trends. Are revenues growing fast and expenditures tracking with it? Are expenditures growing faster than revenues? Those are the 3 main things we look at. So let's look at our historical analysis real quick. You can see there, this has been our annual surpluses for the last 5 fiscal years. I'm not really going to walk in through what I went to that. I wrote that in the report. If there's any particular questions you have, I can answer them. But otherwise, this is what has happened. I've written in the report kind of what went into those, but we'll move forward. So in looking at the changes in revenues and expenditures, you can see the 3% and that first highlight, that's based on fiscal year 20. Revenues grew. So from fiscal year 20, change from fiscal year 19, revenues grew 3%, expenditures went down 1.16%. That's a good trend in terms of expenditures aren't increasing faster than revenues, right? You look at the next fiscal year. Now, these are pandemic years, so these numbers are crazy, but I'm talking about the principle of what I'm looking at. For fiscal year 21, revenues going down 1%, which is crazy. Who would ever imagine your revenues going down? But the revenues went down. Expenditures going up 1.4%. So their revenues or expenditures are growing faster than revenues. And then in our budget, revenues going up 4.7%. Wow, that's really good. Expenditures going up 10%. Now, part of that is our return to normal. So we've had expenditures very low throughout the pandemic, just because we lost a quarter of a school year. And then even last school year, half of it we were remote, and then the other half was hybrid. So there was a lot of things that we just did not spend that we normally would have. And so this is our return to normal. So real quick, so those are the trends we kind of look at. So the last couple of years, we've had expenditures increasing faster than our revenues are increasing. So that's something to watch for. Wrong way. The next thing is our enrollment projections. So enrollment projections can have a huge impact on your school fees. They can have impact on your FTE, things like that. So this is our enrollment projections. So we did projections with Casarda last year, and he's got 3 scenarios. Blue is A. That is the low line. That is from Casarda's perspective, the lowest anticipated numbers you can get. Flip side is C, the yellow, that's his highest that he would anticipate. And the blue, the red is Casarda B, and that is what he's calling most likely. In addition to Casarda, which is done every 5-ish years, I do my own taking on actual data because he can only do it once, and then we could pay him, I guess, to do them every year, but that would be expensive. I update it with actual enrollment data. And so what we can see is based on what's happened this year, we are trending closer between A and B. So what does that mean? That means that on average, and this is very similar to the projection report that we gave earlier, whenever we did that, on average, enrollment going down about 2.5% a year for the next 5 years, district-wide. So that's an analysis of the historical context, fiscal condition, current fiscal conditions. Now we're talking about revenue assumptions. So just for a reminder of a big picture, 87% of our revenues come from property taxes. So the assumptions we have about property taxes are the most important in terms of understanding what drives our revenues and especially our changes. Other local is at 7%. So those are going to be things like school fees, interest income, the TIF surplus check that I'll talk to in a couple minutes. And then you can see state funding and federal make up just a fraction of our revenues. So with property taxes being our most significant source of revenue, the number that is the most important number in terms of revenue projection assumptions is what is CPI. CPI, Consumer Price Index, it's essentially the rate of inflation. It's December change from the previous December. So from 22 earlier, those are all actual numbers. One exception, 22 is a 7% CPI that we probably have all heard, but the math of the way the formula is done, it caps it at 5. So it's 7, yes, but the math will cap it at 5. So I include 5 here because that's built into our assumptions. All the previous data is in there. And then going forward, I use 2 because that is relative. 1, it's a simple number, it's a round number, and 2, it's pretty close to the average. If you can see a trend here, you kind of look, your eyes are kind of close to 2. Now, the way that currently that our compensation is structured, it is related to CPI. So meaning whatever CPI is affects the raises. All right. So that'll be an important thing to remember when I get to that point. But 2%, so 5% CPI is in my assumption, and then a 2% going forward. The next important data point, that is extremely important in these projections is new growth. So that new property coming on the books. On average, we're about 13 to 14 million a year. This last year, so that's 17.8. That is what we believe our real data is for this year. So that was the levy that we did back in the fall that we filed, and we will get the actual real numbers, honestly, probably within the next couple of weeks, a month at most, I would imagine, from the county, but we think it's going to be very close to the 17.8. And then I really project that 13 million going forward. I'm going to be a little more conservative and kind of bringing it down to 10 million, but that's not a huge impact. Like 13 million versus 10 million is not a very large impact. But you do notice a spike there, right? 71 million for the 22 levy, which is the levy we will be doing this fall. That is significant because we have a TIF that's coming off the books. So in Libertyville, in our district boundaries, we have several TIFs. So what a TIF is, it is a zone that, it is a zone that is established that at the moment of establishment, whatever the value of that property is for taxable purposes, it's frozen. So let's say you have a tax zone that they establish and the value is 100,000. That value then for all taxing districts is 100,000. If it gets more valuable, like if there's development and it grows and say it's actually worth 300,000, for the districts, they get value based on 100,000, and that incremental value goes into the TIF fund that is controlled by the village. So the Libertyville TIF is with Libertyville Village. We have a Green Oaks one, we have a Green Oaks one. We've got the Melody Farms. There's the other one in Hawthorne. So there's a number of TIFs within our district, but the Libertyville TIF is particularly of note. So there's kind of a map. You can see that's Milwaukee Avenue. So it's really the downtown is what you're seeing is the TIF. So this was established. I usually don't nerd out about stuff like this, but this is extremely important to understand because the 2022 levy is going to be extremely important because you get one shot. So the TIF was established in 1986. TIFs can go up to 23 years. This one did, but it was extended for another 12 years through December 31st of last year. Now, what's important though, is part of that extension said an agreement was made, including our district agreed to it. 70% of the money that goes to the TIF, the village agrees they're just going to send that check right back to the districts. So let me say it another way. We've been getting 70% of that incremental value since the extension. All right, we literally get a check. And for example, for tax year 2020, which is the last one, we will get another check from them in the next month or two for tax year 21. But for tax year 2020, that 70% check for us was $1 million. And I put in my report, like I showed you, that's the actual checks. Like we literally get a check mailed to us.
Dan, that was just for school districts?
That is just us.
Just us.
Our portion. So Libertyville 70 gets another check. It's probably similar, maybe a little bit more than $1 million. The library, the whatever.
That was
else.
my question. Does everyone get this sort of rebate? Everyone
Everyone gets 70% of the TIF relative to their tax rate.
Okay.
Yep. So all of the taxing districts get that. So some data on the TIF right now. So based on last year's data, that incremental value of the TIF is 57 million. So translate that 57 million based on our tax rate, that's $1.5 million, which makes sense because I said 70% we're getting from this check, kind of 70% of 1.5 million is close to $1 million. So, so the way this will work, because it expired in December 31st of 2021, 2022 is the first year it's in the levy, and it will come on as new growth. It comes on almost as if it's just new construction that didn't exist before. But with the way the timing works for these checks, because the checks are delayed and all property tax timing for fiscal year 22, which is this fiscal year, and fiscal year 23, next fiscal year, we will still get that check. All right, so I put a little chart here to explain this. So the orange is that 70% check. So this is the actual data of the checks we've been getting, plus my estimation for what I think those checks will be this year and the future year. Fiscal year 23, we will get the check still, even though it expired in December of 2021, because taxes are always 2 years in arrear, essentially. So that's property tax timing. But also that year, we will receive half of the levy from that TIF property. Part of that is how we account for our property tax revenues, which I will talk to a little bit later, but that's the reality right now. So fiscal year 23, what I'm saying is those revenues will look higher than what they really are. I mean, they'll really be that high that year, but that's not an annual thing. It's going to come back down. All right. So those things are built into our projections. So the 5% CPI is coming this year, this for 22 levy, and this TIF coming off both at the same time. That's significant. All right. And I'm going to show you the impact of those. Any questions on the TIF? All right. Other revenues, just so you guys understand at a high view level. So 2% annual decrease. Remember I said that's kind of what my projection is for enrollment. That's what I'm doing for student fees. So if there's less students here, there will be less student fees. So I have that built in. Transportation reimbursement. The revenue we get from the state is a reimbursement from the previous year. So if the previous year, if we didn't run any buses, your reimbursement the following year is going to be nothing. Does that make sense? But even this year, we're mostly back to normal. We're not technically fully back to normal because there's not enough buses. There's not enough bus drivers right now. So we're getting a bit of a discount. So we will see in fiscal year 23 more revenue, but I'm hoping that fiscal year 23 will be our first year that we're back to totally normal, running all of our routes on time. And then our fiscal year 24 funding would be restored by then. So there's weird timing again with that one. So I have that built in. The other thing is ESSER 3. So that's the COVID-19 relief. That grant would be eliminated after this year. So I've got that built in. And really all the other sources I have is flat. State revenue has not really increased. Interest income doesn't look pretty. Everything else I'm assuming flat. All right, let's talk about expenditures. Remember a big picture view of our expenditures. 70% of our expenditures are our staff. There are teachers, administrators, and support staff throughout the district. Then we have purchase services makes up 14, then supplies, materials, capital outlay, equipment, those make up the rest. So I'm going to spend most of my time on the 70%. There's the two important ways that we try to understand what are our staffing costs is one, how many people are we employing? And then two, what are those raises going to be for the next few years? Now, the way we do this financially is trying to figure out, all right, what is the change in FTE? So we try to incorporate that. So based on the staffing that we looked at, we've got FTE, change teachers down 1.2, administrators up 3.4, just hold on one second on that, and then ESP down 1.0. Technically what's happening is, so part of the district organizational chart was the person that's doing our director of technology work right now is currently in ESP. That person is moved into an admin. So it's a -1, but then a +1 on the admin side. So technically what's happening, it's a net 2.4 on admin and a decrease of 1.2 on teachers. Beyond that, I'm assuming no other changes. Not necessarily because I don't think there will be, but because I don't know. But anytime you build a projection, you have to use some assumption. I'm starting with 0. I can run different scenarios, but I know my base is I'm starting with 0. The next thing is raises. What is the average raise for a group? Well, funny enough, we have a contract that is expiring this year for our teachers. So I don't know what the raises will be. I have no idea. Those are being negotiated. However, I have to put something in. So if I use the same methodology that we're using for this current year, I can use that to project relative to our revenues. So for example, I kind of wrote the calculation in there, but the way the calculation works, it's whatever CPI is with the floor of 1.5 and a ceiling of 2.5 plus a 2% step. So for next year, that logic would work out to be a floor, because CPI is based on 1.4. So that would be it would hit the floor. So the 1.5 floor plus a 2% step is 3.5. Did I say that right? Yeah, 3.5. So that's kind of the math and how that works. So I project that forward based on whatever the calculation works out for CPI. And then what has historically been our practice is the average raise that is for teachers is also granted to ESP administrators. So those are the assumptions there based on the calculation relative to CPI. So those 2% earlier calculate out to be these 3.67 in future years. Now, the astute question may be, hey, Dan, how can you have raises? If your revenue is going up by CPI 2%, how can you have raises of 3.6? That sounds like it's too much. Well, there's other things that we consider, and I'll get to that after this slide. Insurance. So insurance right now, our preliminary renewals is around an 8.3% increase in insurance next year. That is substantial, especially because we spend $5 million on insurance a year. Part of that is one, we've had pretty bad loss ratios. So meaning we have spent, our plans have spent more money than the premiums that have come in. So that was working against us. And the cost of health services has been going up about 6% based on our consultant's opinion. And so that's significant. And then future years, I don't know, but 6% is kind of more of an average use. Dental next year, we've had great losses in we've had no losses in dental. People need to go to the dentist, please. But right now it's flat. And for each years, I'm using 2%. So other salaries and benefits. So there's other things. I'm just going to run through these real quick, but these are other points these are assumptions that I have to plug in. In addition to getting the raise, teachers also are allowed to move over on lanes. So if they get a master's degree, they can move over. If they earn more credits, they can move over. That cost, I've got some of that historical data in there. I'm using 180,000. Retiree replacements. This is where you can give a raise that is higher than CPI and still afford it, because people retire. And then when we rehire that position, they are hired in at a lower rate than a retiree, because that person may have 20, 30 years of salary increases built into their salary by the time they retire. And so we replace them at a lower range. Now, what is that lower range? That's an important assumption as well. So I have also included for you the historical data of what has actually happened here. And so I'm using 74,000 as my assumption going forward. The other 2 points, tuition reimbursement, I'm assuming flat. 403B contributions, I'm also assuming flat. So that has been going up. First year went up 50%, last year went up 25%. I'm assuming that is flat, right? You have to put some number in. I could put any percentage I want. I'm assuming flat right now. And then we'll talk about the impact. So that's salary and benefits. Now, in terms of non-salary and benefits, really those are broken up into each fund. So for the education fund, 1 to 1.5% increase on like purchase services, supplies, things like that. Operations and maintenance at 2%. Transportation fund at 3%. That coincides with our contract with Lakeside. That is a 3% renewal for next year. And actually, one interesting point is the renewal that we are paying for this year was a 5% increase. So we've been trying to manage some of these contracts that have been larger increases of 5%. To be honest, it's nice to kind of see a revenue source come in that can help offset some of those changes in costs. But our contract with Lakeside is a 5% increase this year and then a 3%. So I've built that in. Capital projects fund, there's nothing in there right now. The reason for that is because there's no identified big projects that we have in the hopper, like actually happening. But we need to incorporate our long-term planning. So stay tuned. I will come back to this. And then Tort Fund, that's our fund that we pay for insurance premiums for property casualty, legal liability, that kind of stuff. That is not where we pay for lawyers. That comes out of the Ed Fund, but just so you understand, that's Tort Fund. 2% increase on there. That one might be a little low, but it's not a very large fund. Okay, those are the assumptions. Pretty much every data point I said, you have to pick some number in all of those categories to have some realistic projection scenario. So as a reminder, we're looking for 3 things. Is there a surplus or a deficit each year, revenues exceeding expenditures? What's the fund balance percentage change? And then what are the trends in revenues versus expenditures? So based on my calculations, and with all the data and the assumptions that I talked about, these are the projections for the next 5 fiscal years. 1.4 million next year, 2.2 the year after that. Now, I don't want to minimize $1 million because $1 million is a lot of money, but you have to remember this is based on a budget of, we're getting close to $100 million. So put that in context for you, because we don't just look at the surpluses. The next thing we look at, by the way, so this is good news in terms of it's not negative. If these were all red numbers, I would say we have a problem that we need to look at, but we don't based on those set of assumptions. And really, if I'm honest, this is the power of a 5% CPI. All right, a one-time 5% CPI. The next slide I'm going to show you, what you already have in your report, so it's not a big surprise. But let's say that CPI was actually 2% instead of a 5%. This is what our projections would look like. Those are much more problematic. So the 5% CPI is crucial to our long-term sustainability. The next thing to look at is fund balance percentages of expenditures. So what you can see here is the fund balance percentage. So that is taking whatever your fund balance is each year, dividing by your expenditures. And you can see that is slowly going down over time. Historically, it went down a ton because we paid cash for these huge projects we were doing. But on just an operating basis, you see it slowly degrade. What this mathematically is saying is that while you do have surpluses, technically they're not projected to be high enough to offset the change in expenditures each year. So what this means is, all else being equal, if your expenditures are going up and you want a constant fund balance percentage, your fund balance has to keep going up to keep pace. So what this is telling you is slowly this is starting to happen. Not really worried about this because that's more longer out. The first couple of years, minute change. So this is, it's not ideal, but I don't see this as terribly problematic. The third area that we look at is the change in trends. So what is revenue changing relative to expenditures? So first year, revenues going up 3.5, expenditures 2.6. That's positive. That's great news. Yet second year, 3.3 versus 2.6. Again, that's a good trend. Once you get beyond those 2 years, though, you see it start to flip. And part of this is because assuming some of these other revenues are flat. You see revenues going up about 2% a year, but expenditures going up 2.8, 2.2, 2.4, right? You're starting to get a little out of alignment there. I don't believe there's anything actionable to do based on that. And even if you had this, like, that's okay for a couple of years. We've had that for a couple of years here already. You can't do that for the long term, though. Long term, you will eventually run into a problem. But my opinion, the first 2 years look really good. So with this, I think we have an opportunity here that I don't want us to miss. I believe we have an opportunity to fully defer our taxes. What do I mean by that? The taxes that we receive in May and June. So we normally get taxes twice a year, twice a fiscal year, September, October, and then May, June. The taxes we receive in May, June, remember June 30th is the end of our fiscal year. The taxes we receive in May, June, the way we talk is that they're for next year. And I think that is perfectly valid and true. The taxes you receive at the end of the year, they're really for next year, but you just happen to get them in May and June because of timing outside of your control. Our financial reporting though, our final financial reporting includes those May, June taxes in the year in which we received them. So we're accrual basis of accounting, but one area that we don't really align totally is the recognition of revenues on property taxes. It is my belief that is more accurate to defer those revenues to the future year. Then it will line up, because then technically right now, every fiscal year you have two levies. You have half of one levy and half of another levy, which is really confusing for folks. This would then align it perfectly. So you have 1 year is perfectly based on that CPI. So the next year would be based on the 1.4 CPI. The year after that would be based on the 7% CPI capped at 5%. It would be perfectly aligned. And then what it'll do is I think it will have our financial reports reflect what we talk about actually happening. Because whenever we report out these fund balances, we really kind of start talking about it. We always remove early taxes. We say whatever the fund balance is, not including early taxes, which is, again, very valid to do, but our reports don't actually match it. We have the opportunity, I think, to do that. So this is now, what would our projections look like if we did fully defer?
And Dan, you're talking about doing this in the future,
In the future,
permanently.
you can't do it in
Now
the
on,
past.
all those early taxes go into next.
Yep, you just started a point and you just, going forward, you're gonna, when you get those monies in, you can book them as cash and a deferred revenue. And then once July 1st comes, then you recognize it as revenue. So if you make this change, this is what our projections look like on a surplus. So essentially what's happening is the fiscal year 23, you could see a $1.6 million deficit. That would be a true deficit. I think that's more accurate. And it's temporary, in my opinion, based on the information that I have. So that's too scary. You know, you could talk about it in a year. Maybe you do it after next year, when hopefully things look, it doesn't look so scary. Because what I don't want to do is, while something may be more accurate, I don't necessarily want to cause an artificial panic that, oh, we're deficit spending and now we've got to make all these changes. I don't want to put us in that position. However, I do believe this is more accurate. I believe this would be more accurate, and I believe it will help us match our words with our actual reports. So let's remember the big picture here. This process is to try to look at the costs that we've identified to serve our mission. How are those costs changing over time? And will we have the money to do it? And based on the analysis that I have, my opinion is that yes, I believe we do. So what next? I'm recommending 3 steps. The first one, I believe that we need to develop and adopt a fund balance policy. We've tried a couple times, it didn't work out so well. I would like us to try again. So in order to do that, we have to define, what do we mean when we say fund balance? What funds are included? What funds are not included? You'd be surprised how, I'm sorry. Yeah.
When you say we tried it many times and it didn't work out, what were the reasons why it didn't work out?
Yeah, I would say we tried it a few times, not necessarily many.
Okay.
What didn't work out? Working out the details of these 3 things. How do we want to define fund balance? How do we want to determine what our desired fund balances are? And then what do we do if our fund balances are more than or less than our desired fund balances?
I think if I can add to that, I think one of the things that would have helped us in that process would have been, had we been deferring those early taxes and had more of an alignment with actual revenues versus expenses. And then the fact that we were in the midst of spending down some of that balance for these big projects and things, it just got somewhat complicated to try to figure out exactly where you land on different, a metric for this or that. And it just became, it's not something you have to do. So it became something that just never really solidified.
And part of that is like, is that including early taxes? Is it not including early taxes? That's another component that can be tricky too. So all of those things are why it was tricky. The second thing is that I think we should consider fully deferring our property taxes. So I think the next step for us is to talk about that options. Let's talk about what those implications may be. And then ultimately that would require a board resolution. So the board would need to pass a resolution officially changing our recognition of taxes. So but I'm not saying you do that next month necessarily. There's more time to do something like this. The third step is for us to incorporate the long-term capital planning. So this is what I mentioned earlier in the meeting, but that I believe is really the next step to kind of fill out fully our long-term financial projections. So what that is we have a list of things on there right now. What we are working on and need to further develop is what is the process for how things get on that list? And then 2, what is the process for prioritizing what's on that list? Because there's not going to be enough money to do everything that everybody wants to do, right? You face, unless you don't, but most people face that in their own lives, right? No difference here. And then we need to add that to our 5-year projections, mostly because it's not an operating cost, but it helps us understand what's our fund balance trend, where our fund balance is projected to be. That's what I have for you. So there's a written report with more data obviously there, but that's what I have.
Dan, would it make more sense to talk about fully deferring the property taxes first so that that is cleaned up before we talk about adopting the fund balance policy?
Yeah,
Does that make it easier to look at those numbers and evaluate those 3?
yes, I didn't mean this to be do this, then this, then this. It was just, these are.
Yeah,
three
no,
things.
I
But
didn't
yes,
see it that way.
I
I'm
think
just-
deciding on fully deferring will, I believe, make the conversation about fund balance much more straightforward.
So then that can be a future agenda item that we can really dive into.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think from my perspective, you showed that fully deferring it this year. I would be curious to see what that would look like if we waited till next year, because the whole dynamic of TIF coming off and the, exaggerated revenues in certain years,
In the 5 point.
if that would make, I think the end result would probably be about the same, but
It would look like. Now, you can have, if we had a budget that had a deficit, so let's say I calculated the budget and oh man, we have a $1.6 million deficit. The next question I would ask, is this a one-time thing or is this structural? Like, is this going to continue for future years? My opinion, it does not look like it would continue. It's really a one-time thing. And really the reason is because the next fiscal year would be based on a 1.4 CPI versus the following year. That's when the 5% CPI really kicks in.
This is simply not recognizing the money we get in that year. We're recognizing it in the following year, so it looks like a deficit.
Yes. And because we are on the accrual basis of accounting, it's more accurate in terms of a full picture.
So
I have
it's
to
not
s-
that we have less money. It's just when it's recognized. I just want to,
It's a paper
Kinda say
accounting
that,
change.
yes.
Yes, that's why I want to be careful. I think it is more accurate, but also you just want to be careful that you don't make one little paper change that then causes an organization to panic. And I don't want that for our organization.
I'm act-
And I don't know that it would. If you
Yeah, I
did something like this, I don't think it would.
I'm actually surprised it's not a greater deficit in that first year.
And I think it makes it cleaner because then the CPI that's affecting those numbers is the same. Trying to parse that out between 2 different years and when we're collecting the money is challenging. And I think it would be challenging to develop a fund balance policy
Mhm.
in that manner. I think that we need to make this change before we really get into the numbers of our fund balance policy.
I think that makes sense.
So
sorry, I had one question back on that slide, but why are we in a negative zone in 27?
The reason is because you are seeing essentially the long-term, when I say long-term, I really just mean multi-year effect of expenditures increasing faster than revenues. This is what I mean by eventually it will cause a problem. Now, do I think that will actually happen 5 years from now? I don't. That is a very, very small number, especially when you're talking $107 million at that point. 140,000 is nothing. It's not nothing, but it's immaterial in terms of it actually technically would be still material, but it is, sorry, I'm just like the percentage of what you consider material technically would be considered material. However, I think that is perfectly doable. Essentially what happens is what you can do mathematically is you can make a small change now or next year that can change that number significantly 5 years later, both to the bad or to the good. And that's why like the assumptions are important. You remember all the things that are in my assumptions, change one of those parameters and you can change the future of our district. So that's why it's tricky. So like times we'll get into things like, hey, Dan, can we afford this? Like, maybe it depends. Maybe it depends. So like, how does that change our long-term trajectory? Is it a one-time cost? Is it an annual cost? Are there other things that it would trigger in terms of a trickle down in terms of how the math works? So. Anything else?
any other? So do we want to then consider the fully deferring property taxes as a future agenda item? And if so, what agenda?
And when?
When? Right.
But the question is,
Do we have
based
to-
on budget preparation that you're going through now and our approval of that budget, I think that would drive, because this would be for the fiscal year 23 budget.
Right.
So we'd have to have that decision made before Dan completes, or even hopefully even before he really gets into developing the 23 budget.
So based on one of the slides, might I suggest, it could even be the next committee meeting. It doesn't really matter. I'll come back with options and what are the implications? Because that's important. That's something I couldn't even answer to you right now. I'd have to think through some of them. And honestly, I would consult our auditor, Betsy. Like I would talk through with her, like depending on when we did this, what would be the impact? So I'd want to understand that more. And I think we could go from there.
Your next steps had develop a fund balance policy first. Were those in any particular order? Because number 2 is
No.
consider fully deferring the property taxes.
No, I just listed them as 3 things. It
Just
was
three
not a
things.
priority. Yeah, I
Okay.
didn't think.
So
that as part
it's
of it.
not necessary that we develop that policy before we propose a resolution to defer. the
It is
property
not
taxes.
necessary, no. I think to Casey's point, I think it was Casey, I think it'll make it easier, for sure.
For our newer members, have you logged into Press yet?
One time, yeah.
Press is, you go to your ISA or the ISB, right? And then you find Press and you can search all of the suggested or recommended policies. They have a policy for :20 called fund balances. We also have one that's 420, but it's about transferring funds. So it doesn't line up with theirs. Doesn't matter. But that would be a place to go to look and see what a typical fund balance policy looks like.
And just logistically, what does developing a fund balance policy look like? Do you present a recommendation to the board and then we vote on it? Or what would that process of defining fund balance, determining desired fund balances, developing the process for over and under desired balances? What just logistically would that look like?
Well, it would follow our process that we do for other policies. So that would come in our P&P committee. Typically what comes with there is an actual draft of what the actual policy is. Once it gets to that point, it's probably more appropriate to talk about what should be in that policy first, rather than like, here's a sample policy. There's more people than just me, so involved in a process like that. So I think my opinion would be, I think it's worth talking about those 3 items that I talked about. What would we want to define? What would we want to do? Like, what would we want our process to be based on that? And using certainly Press as a starting point, I think, or you can just use what Press says. But I think technically the way Press is worded right now, it's a little tricky to understand. I would want to clear that up a bit, but
I would love to see your stab at it.
sure. Yeah, we can.
I do like your idea that let's first figure out what we want to do. And then it's mechanics of writing it down in words. But some of the points you said about, what's our threshold and what do we do if I have no clue what that number should be. So, I mean, I hope you come with some recommendations of what standard work looks like in that area.
Yeah, there are, and I would bring
Yeah.
that. Mhm.
Great.
And you can ignore it and do whatever you want. 'Cause- So you're the board.
And by deferring the taxes, are we aligning ourselves with what other schools are doing with their finances, or is it split?
So first, you'd have to group the districts that are cash basis versus accrual. No, I don't know if it's say most. A number of our comparable districts are on accrual basis of accounting. And if they are on accrual, more likely than not, they fully defer their taxes. But there definitely are districts that are on accrual basis that do not defer their taxes, or that do not defer, just like we don't. Those exist. And I've gathered that data when I was looking at, like, are we an outlier? Does anybody else do this? And I was able to find some good data on that I can also bring back to help you understand, like, are we the only one that does this, or, something like that. So yeah,
Just in essence, if I understand if I'm understanding what you're recommending, we are taking the taxes from a fiscal year and applying it to a whole school year, right? I mean, we're deferring the taxes so that we can see our whole school year as opposed to when we received it.
yes, we'd take the taxes that we get in May and June
But
at the
it's-
very end of the year and saying like, yeah, this money really is for next year. And your reports would actually show that.
Right.
And we've had many, many conversations with public coming to speak to us, looking at the reports at the end of the year and seeing these very large numbers and saying, you're sitting on this money. Well, no. And to explain, that's like your checkbook as it looks the day of payday before you've paid your bills. And once you pay your bills, your balance isn't all that great. But the minute your paycheck hits before you pay your bills, it looks really big by comparison. And we, over and over having to explain that. And I think this just lines up the revenues with the intended time frame that you're spending those revenues, so that that end of the year isn't artificially inflated by taxes that are already earmarked for spending.
I think that's a really helpful way
Mhm.
to think about it.
Yeah, that was. a
Our
great
obligations are
analogy.
now aligning with our revenue.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
you have a
Yes.
certain obligation and. I understand.
And it will be a lot clearer to members of the community and the public that are interested in wanting to dive into that information to understand what they're seeing, because it will make more sense.
And in reality, most of the, having just done one of these, the policies that relate to fund balance typically talk about your fund balance at the close of the fiscal year. So it complicates it when you have revenue in there that's real, this whole concept of the. I
That's
was just
earmarked
talking
for the
about.
following year. Yeah.
So it's easier and cleaner to have that
Mhm.
more accurately represented when you build that policy to say it's X% of whatever your expenditures are for a year, whatever that is. So.
Great. All right, so good conversations to be had in the future. Anybody else? Any other comments or questions? Dan, thank you very much. That was a lot of information and very, very detailed. We appreciate it.
And thank you very much for sending it in advance.
Yes.
Because having the opportunity to look at it and then just being able to watch you walk through it made everything so much more understandable.
Will you be doing this at the regular board meeting as well?
I wouldn't, because there's no action for you to take. This
Okay.
is more of an informational reporting.
Okay.
We've talked about, I mean, I would like to have this information available to the public. I think
Mhm.
that's worth it. So
Yes.
don't know if maybe we just put that on the website, but also I'd have to think about, is it ready for what, like, is it ADA accessible, that kind of stuff? I didn't really think about that when
Right.
drafting it to send to you. Doing something that's going to be posted on the website, you want to make sure it's properly accessible. So
And maybe waiting another committee cycle so that
Right.
we have, I think it's super valuable, especially if we're going to move in the direction of deferring
Mhm.
the revenues and that kind of thing, to be able to explain that in some way and have that documented.
Does that time frame have to be before we receive this June payment?
I don't believe so, but I also want to caveat, I need to think about it more and talk with our auditor. So I don't think it's something you have to do before you get the taxes. Depending on the fiscal year you want to apply, I don't know. You might, I don't know. I'm just
Dan,
gonna
your
stick with that.
example was the taxes received in May and June of 23 being deferred into FY 24, or were you talking about taxes received May and June of 22 deferred into 23?
Say that one more time.
Were you, in your examples, are you talking about, to that point, is it tax revenues received in May, June of 22, this fiscal year, being deferred into next fiscal year, which would actually require a budget change?
Yeah,
This
no,
year,
this would be
you're talking
future
May,
going
June of
forward. I would not
23 into
change this
24.
budget now. I would not change this budget now. What I'm about to say probably should wait for a future meeting, but when you do this change, whenever you change a method of accounting, you essentially have to restate your prior year and then go forward. So it's possible we have our financial report, but we change it, then what they may either, if we already finished, sorry, this is tricky. If we finish this fiscal year and have our financial reports for this fiscal year, and then decide we want to change it for the next fiscal year going forward, they will then restate our fiscal year 22 numbers with that change in mind. So you have a kind of a baseline to comparison, and then you have that change going forward. It's possible that depending on our conversation, and then if the timing doesn't really have a material impact on our process, maybe for fiscal year 22, they just report it
Both ways.
going forward. But if we did it for fiscal year 22, they'd have to restate fiscal year 21. So every time you do that, you always have to restate prior and then go forward. So I want to talk about those. I want to think about those options, understand those implications, making sure we're very clearly understanding what would impact our decision.
Yeah.
Right. It is a significant change. So. Okay. Anybody else? We ready to move on? Approval of bids and contracts.
Yeah, so we have contracts, LHS and Vernon Hills both have contracts with Coke for using Coke products. There are 2 amendments that I have for them. This new software will help me share it with you. But the terms of our agreement are that I won't share this unless I'm legally required to by public. So I have to be careful about sharing this. But essentially all the amendments is it adds a year onto our contract. It kind of forgives the COVID year that we had nothing happen. And they certainly had the right to let nothing happen. Like they didn't sell products, so they don't have to give us commission on nothing. So it does that. And then also what it does is it aligns Vernon Hills and LHS to end at the same time. When I got here, they've been on different time cycles. I would like to get them aligned so that going forward, I can have one contract going forward for the district. So that's what will be coming forward, but those are really the only, they're not very material changes. So that's LHS Coke and that's the Vernon Hills one. The LHS fax room remodeling, we kind of talked about that a little bit. Hold on, which one's first? The abatement? I lost my agenda.
Remodeling.
The remodeling's first. I have it backwards then. So the remodeling, we had 3 bids. The low bid that we thought at the time was 1,367,000 by Can Do, but they came back later and said they missed some stuff. They need to pull the bid. So the next lowest bid is Minuso General Contracting for a bid of 1,673,310. So that was the bid. We talked a little bit about that earlier, so I really have nothing, I guess, to add at this point.
Any questions?
We have experience with them before.
The contractor, I don't know.
I don't believe they've worked in our district. They've worked with STR before. But to my knowledge, I don't believe they've been a contractor.
So, and then the abatement, which is related to that. So we got 4 bids in for the abatement there. And I believe the low one is Able Plus, right?
Mhm.
Able Plus for 67,000. So that's a little bit, that's also in the sheet that we talked about. We didn't talk about abatement a whole lot, but that's also in the information that we talked about earlier in the meeting. So.
Those will be coming up for approval at the regular board meeting.
Yes, a week from today.
Okay, any questions on those? Moving on to upcoming bids and contracts, food service.
Yep, so we talked about issuing the RFP, request for proposal. So it's not a bid, it's request for proposal for the food service. That went out a week and a half ago or so to, I think, at least 6 of the vendors that I'm aware of that we could find. And so we've talked to several of them, confirmed they got the information. So we've got a tour happening this Thursday where the vendors will come meet. They'll tour both building facilities, take a look. The buildings are assembling a committee representative of administrators, teachers, students to look at the proposals and even go on a tour of, probably a handful of final candidates that we think would be good, go tour their facilities and take a look and see what they think. And so that will fill our time in April. So I would hope that at point in April, I probably could come to you with a recommendation. So
Dan, wasn't there some rule change or law change or something that says, or is that just for if you bid a food service that the dollar didn't have to be the primary?
yeah, I think that is for districts that are on the National School Lunch Program, because before I believe
You're
you
right.
had to go with the
You're right.
low bid.
You're right.
Now I think it's trying to acknowledge
Yeah.
it's
Maybe
not
food
necessarily the
taste might-
cheapest person is the one that can give you the best service.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't apply to our situation.
You're right. Thanks.
There will be no disposal of obsolete equipment at the regular board meeting, and then on to future agenda items.
Yeah, just so next month, I should have, by the time we have our committee, our finalized property tax extension. So we levied back in November. I should know what all those final numbers are going to be. So I'll share that with you and we'll see how well we guessed. NIHIP, our medical and dental insurance final renewal, I think I'll know that by the next committee meeting. I have a preliminary, and so I'll know our final. The next one will be fund transfers. So we're mostly done paying for the project. What's it called? Fieldhouse, thank you. And we finished paying for the Vernon Hills edition. So now we need to move money from the right funds to essentially pay for it. So I will bring those moves to you. Pretty much all those moves, and we're going to involve board action. Some may involve hearings depending on which funds we move. I don't know if you remember that thing from last year when we were trying to explain, there's a lot of legal things we have to keep in mind when we're talking about transferring between funds. So that's coming. And then the final one is, I don't know that I'll have this necessarily for the next meeting. Hopefully I can have something, but our transition pathways program. That will be a capital project for us. We're going to have to renovate that space ready to go. So we approved the lease, which is great. Now we have to get that space ready for students to come next year. And so that will be a renovation project for us. So we will try to have something. I know they've been working on the design. They've been working on a lot of things. So we need to bring that forward to you.
And we want to add the discussion on fully deferring property taxes.
Yeah. I didn't have that foresight to put it on here yet. And maybe I thought that was a bit presumptuous, but yes, for sure.
We will do that. Okay, anything else? Any other future agenda items? Well, then this adjourns the Facilities and Finance Committee meeting at 8:05.